And the thing about it was that by the time Zuckerberg and the leadership team at Meta made that decision to pivot, they had already invented a brand new coding language to address like low latency, high throughput, all these different things, particularly around gaming. Because part of the idea was like, could we, the way that people remember how, I mean, this feels so dated. Remember Farmville? Remember when Farmville was doing really big numbers? Like, okay, so the idea was that like if you have these things like Farmville, and then later kind of like Animal Crossing, right? If you had games like that were kind of like casual, but people were like regularly in them, if they had like a token or kind of cryptocurrency thing that was like tied to that, and then you expanded that, like there could be a lot there, was the idea. And so so here I am at Xbox, and I see like this amazing opportunity, and they raised their Series B successfully, and so I end up transitioning from Xbox to being one of the Series B hires at Miston Labs. And yeah, to your point, I'm at builder houses in Denver and Dubai and Paris and Hong Kong. I'm in Bali, throughout my time there, and I learned a lot. The kind, it's the kind of thing they tell you, like there's you really cannot substitute that kind of like experience with anything else, like being an operator and being on these teams like within startups, especially in these kind of unique seasons. So I was there like their pre-mainnet, I was there like post-mainnet. I was doing ecosystem, and then I moved over to grants. And grants was fascinating because I was literally, there was really only a couple people, we were running lean and mean, and between like the 2 or 3 of us on that team, we're looking at thousands of grants from all over the world. And I think just even that kind of chop wood, carry water of like looking at those sorts of pitches and looking at different milestones and looking at things across like DeFi and gaming and Oracle data sort of solutions and public utility SDK proposals and like all these different things. It's one of those things that's very much an on-the-job training that really sticks with you and can really apply to a lot of other things.
So do you think 6 or 5-year-old Sierra who couldn't read would ever imagine doing this kind of stuff you're doing now?
No. but that said, if you told 6-year-old Sierra she was going to read these things about future technologies, and she was going to read these things about how some future technology could be crypto and blockchain, it could help people like this, or some future technologies would be big data Hadoop, and what does that mean? And that basically, like, if you would have told young Sierra that reading superpower would be her passport to discover all these amazing people and amazing things they were doing in the world, I think she would believe that part. I don't think she would have believed how far the rabbit hole went, though.
So, follow question. Do you think young Sierra would ever imagine submitting a poem?
Actually, yes. Yes, because I used to write poetry when I was younger.
Okay.
And I only recently got back into it. But when I was younger, to me, there was, without anybody talking to me about it, because, you have to keep in mind, this is the 90s. In my family, we didn't have a computer until I was in high school. And, like, even the computers you used in the library and everything, it's like, this is back when AOL had disk of how much time you had, right? So I was on the internet. But I still had this thing of just, like, the more that you read, the more you kind of want to process, and the more that you process, it kind of comes out. Now that I know it's prose, now I know it's poetry, now I know it's like journaling or whatever. But at the time, it was like, I'm thinking about so many things from this thing that I read. Let me write something, and it just started off as simple as.
So that. Can you talk about this poem you just submitted? It's like some kind of quantum poem contest.
Yes. So this year, quantum2025.org. So this year is celebrating 100 years of quantum with UNESCO, IYQ. My fund partner at Barklow Ventures from Qubits Ventures, his name is Nardo Manaloto, and he was on the working group that was like, hey, we should do something for 100 years of quantum to showcase like not just the science, but the industry solutions, technology, private-public partnerships, and all of that. And so people can check that out on quantum2025.org. But about a month or so ago, I had got back into writing poetry and decided to like post something on Substack and all that. And then I had happened to see on my timeline that the International Year of Quantum folks were doing this poetry contest. And they were extending the deadline to June 30th. And I was like, what an interesting coincidence. So I decided that I would go ahead and write something. I put it on my Substack, and there's a lot of, and this could be where we get very philosophical. If you look at everybody from like Albert Einstein to somebody like Dr. John Hagelin, who's somebody I have tremendous amount of respect for, and he did a lot of work around string theory. They all kind of talk about, people think about like maybe even like New Age religions, it has its grounds in metaphysics. And the whole thing about metaphysics is that when you start to look at the nature of nature, as some people call it, or like the fabric and forces of reality in the universe itself, it's very hard to not have this kind of existential transcendental experience of like whatever your puny human awareness can offer you on this mortal plane. it can be profoundly humbling and humbling in a way that kind of resets not just like your ego or like, inspires your soul, but like I am constantly in this dynamic state of life and atoms and quarks, and all these things are happening around me and inside of me in the physical world, what I can see and can't see, what I can explain and can't explain, and that's happening all the time, not just to me, but every single living thing and bit of matter around me. And when you start having that awareness built in to how you see the world, yeah, of course it changes you.
So how should people balance this? On one hand, like, man, I'm Jason, I'm important, I matter, blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, I'm a rocket in the middle of fucking nowhere. I'm a tiny speck. My life's insignificant. Like, when I die 2 generations later, no one's going to know who I am, Like, how do you, that's a big balance, right?
I think that's one way to look at it. I think that gets into binaries and dichotomies and polarities of significant or not significant, right? Humanity or other life forms, or not inorganic or organic matter, right? It gets into kind of like that polarity. I think for me, one thing that I'm learning, and kind of like that idea of like witnessing this kind of idea of the unified field and like these bigger forces, is that like when you think about all of the infinity and all the different permutations, even like, they talk about like the sperm and the egg, it could have been any sperm, and there is kind of this inherent miracle that whether you're significant or insignificant, you're organic or inorganic, the fact that you exist and you can be conscious about your existence.
I think that's like a 1 to trillion odd, whatever.
Yeah, like if you can just really bask in that, it's kind of like, whoa.
So this is totally random. I saw this cartoon the other day, maybe a while ago, right? And so the cartoon was what I could have been, right? It was like a bunch of sperms, right? And the sperm was like, this is the sperm that got my, it made me, right, dumbass for my life. And behind it was like one sperm, president of the United States, another sperm, genius, like all these the great things they could have done, but the dumbass sperm won out.
Well, that's one way to look at it. But another way is I was talking to a doctor, work in future tech, biotech, lots of things. I really been leaning into, and in my Strength Finders top 5, I have futurists in there. And so I've kind of been leaning into that more.
Let's go up just a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I've kind of been leaning into that more because it's really helping me navigate so much out there that I think a lot of people have kind of told themselves it's sci-fi. I'm guilty of that. But more to the point of what we're talking about here is like she was talking about, some of this stuff around IVF. And she said, a lot of people don't realize like with IVF, it's not just about helping people overcome fertility issues. She said that like we have data and techniques within IVF that can eradicate genetic cancers, disorders, and congenital disease in 2 generations.
Like on that's one thing. Like I'm gonna ask you this question later on. Like what excites you about tech? What scares you about tech? The thing that scares me about tech is that right there, the genetic engineering, right? Like I think this is a slippery slope, right? Do you have like rich people? Oh, make my son 6'5", blue eyes.
Yeah.
They're 250 pounds, and like for better term, poor people don't have access to that. This, I don't know. Can you imagine like if Hitler had that shit, right?
Yeah.
It's scary to me.
It is scary, but what we're talking about here is not that, right? Okay. I think that's the thing is like this is one thing I'm so glad you bring that up. This is why I'm leaning more into my futurist strengths and realizing like this idea of future fluency is so important. In America, and like I said, I'm guilty of this too, there's this idea of like what happens when you prioritize entertainment over education. And what happens is we entertain notions of the future through sci-fi and all that, and it's all dystopia. It's all dystopia. So we're primarily being entertained and letting that kind of be a placeholder for education about the future in the direction of dystopia. And there's been some recent writing on that's very interesting. Because just then you were just like, oh my God, like you went right to the Ubermensch scenario. But what this doctor was talking about was like, if you're black and you have sickle cell anemia that runs into your family, or like in my case, I have cervical cancers and all that. And we can't do what, the 6'5", all that thing. But what we can see is like, hey, this is the allele, this is the genetic sort of RNA, DNA where that disease lives that causes like these cancers.
But if you don't do that for everyone, doesn't give that one person like an advantage?
I mean, you could say that, but it's kind of like this idea of like, it's the idea of like with chemotherapy, right? It's like if some people can access chemotherapy, which is a whole other thing we can get into, right?
That's a valid point,
right? Because it's kind of like I'm not sure about you, but I've always kind of had a lot of heartburn around all the ribbons, and like somehow that doesn't go to people's chemotherapy, somehow that doesn't go to their treatment, somehow it doesn't, I used to work on some nonprofit boards. I'm looking at joining some others, and we're always asked about donor impact. And I remember when I was like a young and maybe a bit naive board member in some nonprofits, I remember thinking to myself, how come we have to do all these donor impact assessments about how we're directly helping around, in my case, water access or anti-human trafficking impact in education, and these folks can just collect all kinds of roundups and wear ribbons and everything, and people are still on GoFundMe trying to get the cancer treatment.
Yeah. Did you hear about this? I'm presuming it's true because I heard on Joe Rogan's podcast, right? But suppose like 5 or 6 years ago, a Chinese scientist did some genetic engineering where this little Chinese girl would never have HIV no matter what. Mm-hmm. And of course he got blasted for it because we didn't meet the scientific peer reviews and stuff. But the child would never have HIV. And there's big like scientific or science, back and forth, right? It's like ethical and stuff like that, right? So like, is that ethical? Like cure someone from disease forever, right? Like how is that not a good thing,
Yeah, and that's the. I think that,
I bet the little girl's gonna be happy.
Well, yeah, and I think too that ethics is one of those things that kind of reminds me of like, how there's like classical economics and behavioral economics.
Yeah.
Like the classical people, what's the fundamental thing? Everybody acts rationally in their own interest, and you look at that and you're like, have you ever been mad? Have you ever been in love?
Yeah,
have
exactly.
you ever had a little too much to drink? What do you mean?
Has someone like done something wrong to someone you loved,
Yeah, have you ever had to say sorry because you messed up? Like, what do you mean everybody is rational at all times in their best interest?
No.
And so you have a whole kind of thing like based off that. And then here comes behavioral economics that says, or humans kind of have fallacies around what is in their best interest.
Yep.
And also the nature of best interest changes over a person's lifetime.
Yeah, because short-term interest is way different from your long-term interest sometimes.
Exactly. So like there's like kind of this 5D element to even rationally coming to a best interest conclusion.